Hello, fellow faith processors. Welcome to this week's episode of Faith in Process, the show where we explore how real people are actively processing their faith in their writing, in their work, and in their everyday lives. I'm your producer, Grayson Preece, and today Harry will be speaking with, well, me. We are both sharing the stories of how we came to be involved with the Church of the Brethren as we are now. So if you're curious about our backgrounds and why we have the perspectives we do, keep listening.
Good morning and welcome to all of the faith processors in the room today and to all of you out there that are processing your faith. My name is Harry Jarrett. I am the pastor here at Pleasant Valley Church of the Brethren in Weir's Cave, Virginia, and this is Faith in Process Sunday's Cool. I think Sunday is cool, and I would like to do whatever I can to help convince others that Sunday's cool and that maybe it might be fun and a good idea to come to either a Sunday school class or to a worship service and experience all the wonderfulness that brings. This morning, I am very excited because Grayson Preece, who is the producer of the podcast, we've been chatting, Grayson, a little bit here and there about what we should be talking about on the podcast and what kind of rhythm there should be with regular guests and non-regular guests and resident folks. And you actually, I think, suggested that, and it was also, I think we had some conversations with some other folks about it might be a good idea in the current context of everything to chat a little bit about what make Brethren, and in particular the Church of the Brethren, unique in the tapestry of all the other faith traditions and all of the other Christian denominations. And so you suggested maybe we talk a little bit about that. And then I said, well, I just recently did a sermon series from the book. It's a Brethren Press book called Let Our Joys Be Known. It's a heritage curriculum, it's called, and preached through that the 13 different sort of, at least in that book, 13 different tenets or callings is how it's framed in the book. So we said maybe we'll do a podcast of that as well and talk about each thing. But as we have been chatting, we've been thinking that maybe it would be good to introduce ourselves, because I don't know that other than in passing, I haven't really done that much. And you certainly haven't done that because you've been behind the scenes a little bit, editing and doing the intros and the outros and all those kinds of stuff. So we thought today, right, we would introduce ourselves to the faith processors out there, talk a little bit how we came to be brethren. You have some questions, which I'm looking forward to talking about and introducing ourselves. So I don't know if you have anything that you want to say to start out the whole process here?
Yeah, I'm just excited to dive into this a little bit, because I found in my time with the Church of the Brethren that I feel like you hear a lot internally about what is different about the Church of the Brethren from other denominations, but I honestly didn't really even know that the denomination existed until I stumbled upon it and then was involved almost immediately. And so I just think it's nice to have some other resources out there to let people know if they're curious about different denominations, just looking around and they want to know about the Church of the Brethren. It's good to have resources out there. And so since we both started in other places and managed to find our way here,
yes,
I thought that would be nice to explore what that journey looks like.
Yes, and you had to actually convince me a little bit about that. I was resistant to the idea, to be honest with you, at the beginning. I think you knew that. I was like, there's other podcasts that do this, some that are solely focused on this. And so I thought, well, don't want to be redundant, and what makes it unique? And you said what makes it unique is that you and I will be talking about it. Right? So this is the unique perspective of Harry and Grayson talking about why we are brethren and what we appreciate about the various callings and focuses and that the Church of Brethren seems to have for each one of us. Do you want to start with questions, or what do you want?
I wanted to start with talking about a little bit of background. I thought I might ask you about, you started with a more evangelical group as a pastor with the Mennonite Church. What's your sort of history with that?
Okay, so I went to seminary and paid a lot of money to be able to come up with this one phrase. that I am a Methodist Episcopalianite with a long line of brethren thrown in. All right? So, what does that all mean? My grandfather was a Methodist minister. And so I was baptized by my grandfather, I don't know, when I was 2 or 3 years old or something, into the Methodist tradition, all right? Obviously don't remember much or any of that, to be honest. And then my family, I grew up in a Christian family, quote unquote, and we always went to church, but not always the same kind of church. I first remember going to a Presbyterian church. Really appreciated that. Presbyterians, from what I remember, at least the one I went to, John Killinger in Lynchburg was the pastor there that I remember. He was a wonderful preacher. Actually ended up writing a book on preaching that I was used by Reverend Stutzman at Eastern Mennonite Seminary. So that was freaky. I was like, is that the same John Killinger I grew up with? And it was. He was a great preacher, so I kind of was exposed to really good preaching in the Presbyterian church and a little bit of not so much understanding the hierarchy, but seeing that the presbytery working out. Then we moved into an Episcopal church, an Episcopal tradition, and while I was there, I was an acolyte and an altar boy and had First Communion. Went through catechism and First Communion and had First Communion in the Episcopal church. Kind of stayed there for quite a while, and then when I went off to college, got involved in a lot of New Age spirituality, witchcraft, reading tarot cards, all of those kinds of things. Was searching for some sort of divine connection through all of those avenues because I didn't really get, even though I was exposed to God, I didn't really feel connected at that point. And then actually met my wife, girlfriend that became my wife, and she shared Jesus with me, and so I had a born-again experience, and that's a long story, but pretty radical transformation kind of thing. And we started going to a Pentecostal church, or a charismatic church, that met in a YMCA in Winston-Salem. And we decided we were going to get married. We came to the Valley and went to a Pentecostal church, all right, which was a lot of fun. But we were young adults, probably somewhere around your age, young married couple, and very excited about God and Jesus and wanting to get involved in the church and ministry. So we wanted to get involved, but they said, no, you can't get involved unless you've been here for a year. So we were like, nah, not doing that. A year's a really long time for a young adult, right? Yeah. So we were like, no. And we heard about this Mennonite church that had just started. It was Cornerstone Mennonite that was just starting in Broadway, Virginia, which is about a half an hour away from Harrisonburg. So it had just started. It was like maybe 6 months old. And it was very small, but very dynamic, exciting congregation. And so we went there and didn't know anything about Mennonites. I had grown up in Harrisonburg seeing Mennonites, but all I knew was horse and buggy and bonnets. My grandmother actually told me a story along the way that she said when I was coming to Harrisonburg and seeing all the Mennonites and the buggies, that I said that I want to be a Mennonite when I was a kid. And she said, oh, yeah. And I said, yeah, but the only thing I'm worried about is I don't think I'll be able to reach the pedals on the buggy. I guess I thought, even though there was a horse in front of it, that...
You still have a brake.
Yeah, I still had to push some pedals somewhere. I always was exposed to the Mennonite church, but had no clue about what it was. But when I went to the Mennonite church in Broadway, Cornerstone, they were very Mennonite at that time, and started learning about the Anabaptist vision. They were very open and welcoming to let us get involved. So like they invited us to lunch. A family invited us to lunch and got us involved there. And then we got involved in the praise team. And then within 2 or 3 weeks, I was directing the Christmas play. And then within months, we were leading small groups and getting discipled and being called to missions and ministry and those kinds of stuff. So the Anabaptist vision really became exciting for me. I felt like I had come home to a practice and a theology of church an orthodoxy and an orthopraxy of how to be church in an Anabaptist way. And that felt very much at home and right for me. Didn't quite understand why that was the case, but it was. We became Mennonite. We went on the mission field with the Mennonite church and helped to plant a number of churches in Italy and Sicily. Came back, went to Eastern Mennonite Seminary, which is a Mennonite seminary, got all involved in all of that and learning about all the different things in not only in Anabaptist and Mennonite tradition, but also just Christian history and all of that. I was a Mennonite pastor in a variety of places, and then burnt out about 13 years ago. Just after 20 or so years of ministry, just got tired and was ready to be done. So I took a 13-year break. In the midst of all of those, that time, my wife was the youth pastor here at Pleasant Valley Church of the Brethren. And she was walking in the graveyard, and she was noticing names on the gravestones of my family. And she was like, I don't quite understand this. What's up with that? Started doing some research, and it turned out that the Wampler side of my family, which is my mother's side, are brethren from way, way back.
Yeah, that's a big name up in Bridgewater.
Yeah, so Peter Wamflen, they were Lutheran in Switzerland, in a town called Wamflen. And they migrated as Lutherans to Pennsylvania, where they met an early in 1700s Brethren church. The story goes that maybe he even met and talked to Alexander Mack. But then they became Brethren. I know this is a long story, my apologies.
No worries.
And so became Brethren, and then John Wampler moved to Timberville and started one of the first Church of the Brethren in Timberville, one of the first meeting houses there, all right? And so that side of the family was very Brethren, very participatory in the whole Brethren movement in the United States. M.R. Ziegler, who is a big name in the Brethren Church, helped to start the Heifer Project and World Council of Churches and all these kinds of different things, called the Pragmatic Prophet. He was my great uncle. And a lot of big name brethren, Samuel Miller, who was my great-great-grandfather, or great-great-great-grandfather, one of those, helped to start Pleasant Valley Church of the Brethren. And he's the one that my wife saw buried out there and was like, what's up with that? I knew none of this because during, I think it was the Vietnam War, my grandfather was very involved in politics, did not like the peace position of the Church of the Brethren. And so he left the Brethren Church at that time.
That's a really interesting war to have been leaving for that reason. I find that interesting. Such a controversial
I guess
war to be involved in at the time.
Yeah, it was. And I need to fact check my story because sometimes we tell stories and part of them is true. But I do know that he left because of the peace position and because he felt like that there should be military service. In the later years of my mother and her sisters, they were going to other churches. And of course, I didn't grow up Brethren and didn't know that I even had any of this Brethren heritage until my wife found out about it and did some studies here when she was a youth pastor at Pleasant Valley Church of Brethren. After I left the Mennonite ministry about 13 or 14 years ago, part of that was also that my wife got invited to be a Church of the Brethren pastor in Harrisonburg. So she started pastoring Church of the Brethren churches, and I wasn't a pastor. I was working on another business endeavor, but I attended church with her. So for about 13 years, I attended a Church of the Brethren church. And as I attended and learned, I found a home that fit me more than the Mennonite tradition for a variety of reasons, and we can talk about that along the way. But now I am back to my roots that I had no idea I had in the Church of the Brethren, feeling very good about the Church of the Brethren, the tenets, certainly hopeful for the church, and feeling like the Church of the Brethren, as do other Anabaptist believer church traditions, really have a lot to offer our world in this particular age. I think, and we'll talk more about that as we go through all of these things, but I think the way the Brethren Church looks at spirituality, at service, at peace, at the scripture, at priesthood of all believers. There are just so many different things that we'll get to talk about here over the next year as we do this once a month that I think really are helpful. So I'm excited to be in the Church of the Brethren. I'm excited to be a pastor in the Church of the Brethren. And so I am a Methodist Episcopalianite with a long line of brethren thrown in. So one phrase for that very long story. So that's me.
Way back here.
And that's me in a nutshell at 62. And you are how old?
I am 22.
You are 22. So tell us your 22-year-old version.
So mine has about 40 years less of complexity in it. I did not spend 20 years as a Mennonite pastor.
Sure, but your story is yours.
Yeah, so I actually think this is really interesting because I came into this conversation thinking we're going to have fairly similar stories running across the Church of the Brethren and then making our way here. But I'm realizing actually how different our stories are because it sounds like sort of a return for you to what some of your ancestors were.
It feels that way. Yeah, and it's very exciting because of that, I think.
Yeah, so that's really fascinating to me. On my side, I grew up, was raised by a mom who I believe when she was a child, she was Southern Baptist. My dad, I'm not really sure exactly what he was raised in, but atheist, not generally atheist, agnostic, not believing in a God, but they took me to church I believe it was an Episcopalian church. I always switch up with what it is because I can't quite remember, but I didn't connect with it a lot at the time. I was very young. It was a very old congregation with not a lot of opportunities for a young child to get involved in some sort of way. And so
no acolyte or altar boy for you?
No, surprisingly not.
It's really fun carrying the cross down the aisle in a robe. It's a trip.
I'm sure if I'd stayed a few more years, I would have loved it.
Yes, I bet you would have. I can see you doing that. We could make that happen here, maybe, if you... Maybe not.
I'll
maybe not.
Walk in on my knees. I'll put some shoes on my knees.
Yeah, I don't think the brethren would go for that much, but yeah. Sorry.
And so once I got to a certain age, my parents just gave me and my older brother the opportunity to make our decision, and we decided to just stop going because we didn't feel like we were getting a lot out of it or connecting a lot with the community there. And so for many years, I was just not involved in church at all. Didn't really see much of a reason to be involved because it felt like just some old people in a room listening to somebody talk on a stage. And then I went to Camp Bethel because I have family friends. My family's always been connected with the Lenore family. Barry Lenore was the director there for about 20 some years until he just recently retired. And so I went there mostly to spend some time with my friends, to just have fun, and then ended up really enjoying the spirituality of it. I was surprised to see this whole new side of how the Bible can be read, can be understood, and it just felt so much more accessible to me than what I had seen growing up. So I was excited about that. I was just excited about this sort of emphasis on community, on creating those connections, those relationships. Actually, what Barry Lenore used to always say is it's about relationships with God, with creation, and with each other. And so those are the sort of three, I want to say almost the Trinity, not in the same way as the Holy Trinity, of course, but the Trinity of these relationships we really need to work on in our lives for general fulfillment and for being helpful to our communities.
Kind of three legs of a stool or something.
Yeah, you can't balance on just two.
Right.
Unless you're a human with a whole lot of fancy muscle work.
With feet. Yeah.
We got a little bonus. So that's how I started falling in love with this whole Church of the Brethren concept. And then at the time I was still just on the youth end. So I got old enough to start working there. I became a counselor in training, started learning how to take care of kids on just the physical levels, and then also on the spiritual level, how to lead Bible studies, how to lead worships, and ended up working there for 6 years. Because of some of the folks that I met there that really inspired me, I looked at Bridgewater as a college because about a third of the folks that were working there at the time when I was starting to work there had all gone to Bridgewater and really loved it. And I knew it had a Brethren connection, so I thought, you know what, why not? I'm sure it'll have the same sort of social emphasis on relationship that I've felt here. And even though it's even though the college is no longer affiliated with the Church of the Brethren, it does still have that feeling of community being a really vital aspect. It's a beautiful campus, of course, and so there's that sort of relationship with creation part as well. But there's this really big emphasis on relationships with each other. And so I started going there. I started going to the Church of the Brethren that's conveniently just up on the hill where you can walk to it from campus, and found a group where the congregation, to be fair, is on average a lot older than I am. But I was able to connect a lot more with the message there than I was with the message at the church that I went to as a kid. And so I've just been going there ever since, and yeah, never really looked back. Luckily, I've also made some friends at Bridgewater Logan, who works in the praise band down here, finally brought me down here to meet you, and then that's how we got connected. And
the rest is history.
The rest is history. Now we're here.
Now we're here, talking into a microphone together.
Exactly, yeah. I think Camp Bethel was a really big foundational piece for me for learning how to not just engage with the Church of the Brethren, with learning about faith and creating a relationship with God, but also learning how to teach that to kids who are trying to learn how to build relationships in general.
Right.
Because that's a big skill that you have to learn growing up. And so I think learning how to teach that really helped it cement inside for me. And so that made it easier. I don't know. That just made me feel much closer with the whole process and with God and with creation than I had been before.
Yeah, very cool. You said that Bridgewater College is no longer affiliated with the Church of the Brethren?
I'm fairly certain. I think,
is that true?
I think within the last decade, it's at some point shifted from affiliated with the Church of the Brethren to historically Brethren. I could be mistaken about that.
I thought it was an agency like On Earth Peace or Bethany Seminary. We need to look that up.
I think there are aspects of it. There's certainly scholarships that are funded by the Church of the Brethren.
Yeah.
If you go there and declare that you're a Church of the Brethren student, you get X amount of money to just
Okay,
go
but
there.
it's not under. Yeah, it says historically affiliated with the Church of the Brethren. That's interesting. Because it was the Church of it was the College of the Church of the Brethren, really.
Yeah, and it's still seen that way, I think, a lot in the Church of the Brethren.
Yeah, I wonder. We'll have to look into that. That's very interesting. Because I know, like Bethany Seminary is officially
It's a Brethren seminary.
Yeah, one of the seminaries. We'll have to do some fact checking and study. That would be but it does say that it's historically affiliated, and those deeply influenced Bridgewater College, but maybe it's not under the umbrella of the Church of the Brethren. Because this is a little tangent side note, but the annual conference, which is the priesthood of all believers, the membership of the Church of the Brethren, which is unique, is the governing body. There's no presbytery or bishops or those kinds of things in the Church of the Brethren. So the annual conference is the one and the people get together, and the delegates get together and have queries, which are basically questions about theology and practice and those kinds of things. And they're the governing body. They're the ones that make the decisions for the Church of the Brethren. And so every year, like On Earth Peace and Bethany Seminary, and I think Eder Financial, there's a number of agencies, disaster service, all of these different agencies and ministries have to give a report and have to be reapproved, I guess, as an agency. And as you mentioned that, I'm thinking, I'm not sure that I've ever seen Bridgewater College get up and give a report like that. So, yeah, new information for me. So, we just so much learning in these conversations. Yeah,
I think it is new to a lot of folks because I think it just happened quietly a few years back, shortly before I started going there as a student.
Really, because of the thousands and thousands of people that listen to our podcast, now everybody's going to know, right?
Now everyone's going to know.
Now everyone in the world. Yeah, if you're listening, you're not one of 1,000.
You will be one day.
You'll be maybe one day. Yeah, exactly. Now you're the remnant-ish. Well, you had some questions. I told you that this was going to take a while, and it did. The sharing of our stories, because I knew how long mine was, and that was the short version. But we probably do have time for one or two two of your questions. So
Alrighty.
why don't you pick one and we'll see how long that takes to answer.
Well, yeah, so I wanted to talk about, since we are going to be diving into specific facets of the Church of the Brethren, what sort of parts of the faith or of the experience of being a part of the Church of the Brethren really drew you in from elsewhere?
As opposed to staying Mennonite or doing some other things.
Yeah.
My wife was a pastor in the church.
That sure helps.
Which helps. I think, honestly, going back to family roots, I think definitely had to play into that. I love the idea that I have this long history that, whether figuratively, imaginatively, or really goes all the way back to Alexander Mack. It really does go a long way. It does. There's for real stuff that goes all the way back to some of the early congregations of churches or brethren in Pennsylvania. So that feels intriguing and it feels good. And maybe it shouldn't, but it just does, to be part of that lineage. And I think one of the reasons it feels good is that there's this thing called the Mennonite game that is played by Mennonites whenever you meet somebody new. Oh, you're nodding, so you probably know about that, right?
I know about it in the Church of the Brethren.
Okay,
Everyone always asks me my last name, and I tell you, you haven't heard this one before.
Right. It's a big thing in the Mennonite church. I think, and I was speaking with Lonnie Yoder about this, I think that part of the Mennonite game is because of the trauma experienced by persecution that happened to the Mennonites, the early Anabaptists. The Mennonites were getting killed. Their tongues ripped out, being drowned in rivers, being tortured, being pursued, having to run away for your life. And they had to be very careful about who they talked to about their meetings and their faith. And so I think that's where a lot of the Mennonite game came from, is if you know the same kind of people that I know and their real names and what their names are and who they were connected to and whatnot, and so do I, then we can probably trust each other, and you probably are not going to kill me, and you probably know I'm not going to kill you either. But the way that I experienced it was I had to do what you had to do. Was my last name is Jarrett, and how are you connected to this? And so I felt like I had to do a lot to be part. And the Brethren tradition, there seems to be more of an inclusiveness. Not that the Brethren Church perhaps is more welcoming than any other congregation tradition, but there seems to be more of a willingness to let people come in and co-labor and co-own the history and the ministry, the work. The Church of the Brethren motto, mission statement is continuing the work of Jesus simply, peacefully together. And there seems to be a real willingness as new people come to say, all right, let's get to work together, which I like. It makes it easier, and I like to be part of a tradition like that because then as people come, it's really easy to get them involved. Like you. You came for worship in the Grove, and I found out that you did some IT stuff at Bridgewater, and you seemed nice, and I said, how'd you like to produce the podcast? Like on the second day we met.
Yeah.
Which is my way of being, let's do this together kind of thing. But there is an ethos of that, I think, in the Church of the Brethren, where it's not only so much in the Mennonite church, but in other churches like our experience in the Pentecostal church, and certainly probably in more of the hierarchical churches, you really have to be tested. You really have to be, believing correctly, and you have to be behaving correctly before you can really belong. Whereas it seems to be that the paradigm of the Church of the Brethren is that you can belong, and then belonging is just going to naturally change behavior. And then as you hang out, you probably start seeing the world in a different way, seeing God in a different way because of this unique, open, and relational perspective that the Church of the Brethren seems to have. And I like that. I really like that in a world that is so segregated, dualistic, and judgmental. I just think that the Church of the Brethren has some really unique things. So that would be the first thing that I would talk about. There's a whole lot of other things that we'll talk about that I really like, but that's what I would say today. What about you?
I definitely agree with all those things that you're talking about that create that belonging. I think some specifics that sort of give off that feeling are like just the idea that we're all at a different point in our faith journey, and the fact that it's a little bit less evangelistic than other denominations. And so there's not like an expectation on someone coming in for the first time. Not everyone's crowding around them to say, hey, you have to stay, you have to come back.
What do you believe about Jesus?
What do you believe? Exactly. It's not, I realize that's an exaggeration. I don't mean to be saying that there are a bunch of churches that do that, but I feel like there are groups that are more leaning towards that. And for the Church of the Brethren, you just walk in and people say, hey, how are you doing? And yeah, that's definitely what has been my experience. Obviously, at summer camp, that's the whole goal.
Yeah.
Kids who come there show up on Sunday and leave on Friday, and that's their whole experience.
Yes.
Probably with the Church of the Brethren, unless they're specifically Brethren kids, for the whole year. And that's probably their most influential spiritual experience for the whole year. And so we got to build close relationships fast. And then, yeah, just being able to run into that also at the Church of the Brethren up in Bridgewater, and then down here at Pleasant Valley has just been such a blessing. But some of the things that theologically really stood out to me are the peace position. I've had several conversations while in college. Actually, you and Benjamin, who hopefully we'll have on here sometime to speak. But my friend who I live with, he's, I believe, been Brethren all his life. And I had some conversations with him and some other friends who are maybe less associated or not associated with the Church of the Brethren about what it really means to be a pacifist and to not stand for violence in any situation. And I think he's radicalized me a bit on that. I just really think that's a fascinating concept, the idea that just like ever being violent is wrong, and that there is, at least for us, I realize what we've talked about, there's other contexts, but in my context, in my life, I've never had a good reason to be violent.
Yeah. And
I think it's very likely that it will stay that way.
I hope so, for sure.
So that's been something that's really stood out to me. And yeah, that piece, again, where everyone is on their own faith journey, I just think it's fascinating because everyone you talk to has a different experience. And while that is true in other churches, I don't think people are as aware of it. And so you'll talk to somebody about Jesus and they'll be able to tell you, yeah, he died on the cross, rose the third day. These like story points, they've got the plot points. They don't, and some of them feel a strong connection to it, but I've had people try to evangelize me before, and as somebody who, again, for quite a time was not connected to a church, and it just never has any sort of connection with me because they just expect me to understand God the same way they do already before they start talking to me, because that's just the way it is. Whereas the Church of the Brethren encourages this exploration of faith and this sort of push and pull conversation. That's why I was also really drawn into doing this podcast. Is because I really think that conversation is important.
I agree. Our faith is in process, whether we realize it or not, and we should be processing that together, I think. So, thanks. This was fun.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun.
I look forward to doing it again. And now it's time to go to church.
It is.
Thank you, all of you that have endured this conversation and listened all the way to the end. Hopefully you'll come and join us one day, either in the classroom here at Pleasant Valley Church of the Brethren at 9:30 typically on Sunday mornings, or join us for church, or reach out comment-wise, chat that way. If you happen to be Where's Cave, maybe we can go out for coffee or something. All the best to you, and we'll talk to you next week.
Sounds good.
Anything else you want to say?
Let's go to church.
Let's go to church. All right, there we go.
Thank you for listening to Faith in Process. Make sure you're the first to know when a new episode comes out by following us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you stayed this long, you might as well share this episode with one of your friends so you can continue the conversation. If you're interested in supporting the show or hearing the full uncut audio each week, pledge a donation of just $5 a month on Harry's Substack. That link is with some other useful ones in the episode description. Every contribution goes a long way towards supporting this meaningful mission as our weekly conversation continues, and you will get access to nearly 20 minutes of pre-show conversation every week. Are you curious what guests we have coming next? You can find our most up-to-date calendar of speakers at the Faith and Process page linked in the episode description. That's also a great place to look if you're curious how you can join us on an upcoming Sunday.